Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, chemical weapons. What's being done to rid the world of them in Syria and beyond? And which countries are holding back eradication efforts? Bilal is off this week, but filling in as digital producer, we have Julio Ricardo Varela. Welcome to the hot seat. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Femi.
I love conversations like the one we're about to have about chemical weapons because our online community, they have so many questions. So I'm curious to see what they're curious about. What are you seeing?
We're seeing a lot of questions. We've asked our community to come in and tweet those questions, and here's one that I'm going to share that just came in. This comes from @Russ Finkelstein, who says, little seems realistic in Syria these days because that's what we're talking about. So why should disarming a chemical weapons stockpile be any different? So this is just one of the many questions that are coming in, and you can continue to tweet them in using hashtag AJStream.
Oh,
Femi.
He's looking very thoughtful. Paul Walker is our on-set guest. He has the answer to that question and so many more. Paul Walker is a chemical weapons expert. He's director of Green Cross International, has an organization working to eradicate chemical weapons. Paul is also one of this year's laureates of the Right Livelihood Award, often referred to as the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize. Paul, I don't know how we got your brain in here. You're so accomplished. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here. You know, many of us have been working on the eradication, the really abolition of chemical weapons for over 20 years. So the Syrian situation is actually really very, very wonderful in some ways.
It's wonderful?
It's wonderful in the way because it's raised the whole issue of chemical weapons globally that no one had ever heard of before.
Right.
So Syria becomes the 190th state party to join the International Chemical Weapons Convention. We have 190 countries now they're in, and now we have to move forward and destroy the stockpile.
This is Paul Walker. This is why he's good. I just said hello, and you see the knowledge he dropped on me. Now, before we get started, the stream is a show that's driven by you. So let us know if you have a suggestion for a future program. Great place to do that. Facebook.com/AJStream. That is where I am right now. You can scroll down like I am. So many places to put in your ideas and your suggestions for future programs that we could be doing on the stream.
I am Hilmar Vegar Peterson. I am the CEO of CCP and I'm in the stream.
So Syria has until Friday, that's this Friday, to finalise a plan for the safe disposal of its chemical arsenal. The deal was brokered by the US and Russia following an August nerve gas attack that killed more than 1,100 people in Syria. That was one of the worst such attacks in decades. Syria has already destroyed its declared production facilities, but many experts say the most difficult part will be in getting rid of the chemicals themselves. And Syria has more than 1,000 tons of chemicals. Some are already predicting that Syria will miss next year's destruction deadline, pointing to the same struggles had by larger countries, including the US and Russia, which have both failed to meet international deadlines to decrease their own chemical stockpiles. So, just how challenging is it to get rid of chemical weapons, and what stands in the way of a world free of them? Here to help us talk about this, Faiza Patel. She's a former senior policy officer with the UN's Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. She's joining us via Skype from New York. And in Sweden, we have Mustafa Kibarulu. He specializes in arms control and disarmament and is a professor at Okan University in Istanbul. So Mustafa, Faiza, Paul, great to have you all here in the stream. Faiza, I'm going to ask you first of all, you were formerly part of the OPCW. That's what I'm going to call it because it's such a long title. So Syria has to have this plan to get rid of its chemical weapons. What do you think the plan might be? What should be in that plan? And we're talking by Friday as well.
That's right. So Friday is the deadline by which the OPCW has to approve the Syrian destruction plan, which means that they've probably already in discussions with the organization as to what that destruction plan would look like. And I think the big issue with the destruction plan is where the chemical weapons are going to be destroyed. There's no really good solution to this. Obviously, Syria is in a state of armed conflict. There's a civil war going on, and it's going to be difficult to put up the facilities needed to destroy chemical weapons in country. On the other hand, transporting chemical weapons is also quite a dangerous thing through war-torn territory. And finally, there's really a big legal question in my mind as to whether you actually can legally transfer chemical weapons from Syria to another country. Let me just back up and explain, and I'd love to hear what Paul and Mustafa think of this as well. But the Chemical Weapons Convention actually says you can't transfer chemical weapons from the territory of one country to another. And that's a prohibition that applies both to the country that's sending the weapons, so Syria in this case, and to the country that's receiving them. So that's going to be quite an obstacle that they're going to have to get around in this destruction plan.
And you're leaving that decision to Syria because they're in a conflict right now. Who else is helping them out making these tricky decisions? Mustafa?
Well, actually, regarding the circumstances, the OPCW's task is first and foremost to verify that the Syrian authorities are doing their job properly. I mean, within the time bounds as well as within the safety constraints. So the task of the OPCW is not to go ahead and destroy these facilities themselves or the material, the substances, chemical weapons themselves, but to verify that the job is being properly done, executed by the Syrian people. And with respect to transformation or transportation from one country to another, first, regarding the peculiarities of the current situation, as far as I know from the press, some of the news have been released by Jordanian authorities that they can sort of open their territories probably nearby for the destruction, safe and sound destruction of the material, because as has been indicated just a minute ago, that there is a war going on, civil war going on in Syria, and it is not possible to give 100% guarantees for the safety of the OPCW inspectors as well. So this is also an issue. So regarding the circumstances, some exemptions may be made with respect to the transportation of the material.
All right. So Paul, Pfizer very kindly decided to share some of these conundrums with you.
Right.
So what do you do in this situation?
The key words are safe and secure.
Right.
I mean, the destruction program in any country, whether it's the United States, Russia, Albania, India, South Korea, has to be safe and secure. And I think the general consensus now is it's not really safe and secure sufficiently in Syria. So the Executive Council at the OPCW will give permission to transfer these chemicals. They're mostly precursor chemicals, not live agents, so it's much safer. They're like industrial.
Do you want to, every time you say something that's a little technical that maybe I might not have studied at school, I'm going to ask you just to stop and help me out here. The audience are totally on top of this, me not so much.
So precursor chemicals are chemicals which are used for they can be used to make weapons, chemical weapons, or they can be used in industrial processes. Like chlorine is used all the time in sewage treatment, but it can also be a chemical weapon.
Sure.
So they're transferring, the decision really has more or less been made. It'll be announced on Friday to transfer almost all the agents, the chemicals, to Albania.
Okay, why Albania?
And that's what I asked a few weeks ago too. I said, Albania? Whoever thought of Albania?
Yeah.
Well, Albania has gone through, number one, a chemical weapons destruction process previously. In 2007, they had a small stockpile they suddenly discovered. It was like a big oops in the OPCW. It took them about 6 months to destroy 16 tons of mustard agent, which had been provided to them by China earlier. But they've also been a very receptive country to the United States and Russia when they've asked who might be willing to receive these chemicals, set up a base. It has to be a small industrial facility, and actually destroy them. So it looks like it'll happen in Albania in the next, starting in the next 2 to 3 months.
So we have a video comment that came in from Ralph Trapp, and this is what Ralph said, talking about the possibilities of eradication.
This is going to be a very difficult operation, largely from a security point of view, because we're in the middle of a civil war, we are in the middle of atrocities being committed and war fighting going on. So it is very difficult to make arrangements in a safe way and apply technologies to destroy these weapons, which in any case is a difficult thing to do, because these are very dangerous, toxic materials that need particular care in terms of how they will be handled, how they will be transported, and also how they will be destroyed.
So the question is for Mustafa. Eradication will be difficult. Do you agree with that statement, or do you disagree?
Well, I agree, but we should also bear in mind that although there's civil war going on in Syria, most of these facilities are in territories that are under almost strict control of the Assad regime. So, and it is also indicated in the reports by the OPCW to the press that 39 out of 41 facilities were just the checks were completed, and the 2 of them were indicated by the Syrian authorities that they were abandoned already, maybe during the course of the civil war, or maybe even before. So, although war is going on in Syria, but not in the entire country, some of territories are, of course, a typical war zone, but some other territories are under the control of the regime, and therefore, although on the overall, I wouldn't say it's an easy task to perform, but when we look at the situation where these facilities are located, safety might be, and security might be achieved, comparatively speaking, of course, better than other places in Syria.
You know, Paul, you said that this is a wonderful situation with Syria, so I'm just going to broaden it out into a bigger debate about chemical weapons. So if we're thinking about chemical weapons and then conventional weapons, I'm going to show you a tweet here from Mohammed. This echoes a lot of people's thoughts here. Obama is worried for the safety of Syrian people. That's what the tweet says. And you go down to a satirical cartoon, and President Assad is covered in blood. The inference is here that he is using conventional weapons to do more damage than chemical weapons. Why are we so up in arms about chemical weapons? Because conventional weapons have killed so many more people, even if we just talk about Syria.
Absolutely. I mean, the bad news, the good news, I guess, is that we're getting rid of Syria's chemical weapons. The bad news is we're not stopping the civil war at this point. And many more, there's been over 100,000 people killed at this point. Most of those have been 95%, probably 98% of that has been conventional weapons. So I completely agree. This is a very difficult situation from a civil war point of view and a violence point of view. Hopefully, my hope is that with the abolition of chemical weapons in Syria, with Syria finally joining really the whole international community on banning a whole class of weapons of mass destruction, this will in fact begin to catalyze the political decisions which have to be made to really bring the civil war to a stop, and we can find a diplomatic solution to the war.
That's not the only sticky question. I'm going to pose another one to Faiza that, again, we've been hearing a lot about, and that is, how do you actually distinguish between a chemical weapon and something that's not a chemical weapon? Because some things come up in the Convention for Chemical Weapons and some things don't.
Right, so that's a great question. I mean, the basic theory is that if a weapon is killing you due to its toxic property, so it's poisoning you, it's a chemical weapon. Now, at the time that the Chemical Weapons Convention came into force, there were a certain number of weapons that we knew were chemical weapons, and we knew their precursor chemicals, which is what Paul was just talking about. But we also understood that, countries could develop new formulations that could be used as chemical weapons. And so the basic structure is that if something is meant to be used as a chemical weapon, if that's the purpose for which it's being used, and that's the purpose for which it's being developed, then it counts as a chemical weapon.
You might add too, Faiza too, I'd say that we have schedules. There are 3 schedules, number 1, 2, and 3, in the Chemical Weapons Convention that actually lists the specific chemicals and precursor chemicals as well.
What about new weapons that are being made that might not be on that list? Does it cover that too?
It doesn't. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. As Faiza and Mustafa know, I'm sure. The Chemical Weapons Convention, which was negotiated in the 1980s, signed in 1993, entered into force in 1997, lists a very specific number of chemicals and precursor chemicals, but it has general principles that says any chemicals that are designed to kill cannot be used in warfare, period. So even though the chemical may not be listed in the schedules, it's certainly new chemicals. If anything, new innovation comes through.
So that's like a catch-all, just
it's
in
a catch-all.
case.
It's what's called the general principle.
Exactly. And the other thing that's interesting about the thing is,
Mustafa, we hear you. Hold up one moment. We'll come back to you. Go ahead, Faiza. I can hear you and Mustafa. So I'll go to you, Faiza, first, and then Mustafa will bring you in. And I know, Julio, you've got something from the community as well. So, okay, we have a chain. Starting with Faiza.
I wanted to just mention riot control agents, right? Because there are a lot of chemicals that are used in riot control, white phosphorus being one of the most controversial of these. And the way that the Chemical Weapons Convention deals with it is kind of similar to the way that it deals with new chemicals, which is you can't use a riot control agent as a method of warfare. Now, some years ago, there was a great deal of controversy about Israel's use of white phosphorus, and the Israelis claimed that they were using it as a riot control agent. The people who were killed and injured, and many human rights groups said they were using it as a chemical weapon.
Okay.
And so this is the kind of issue that also comes up in this context.
Sure, Mustafa.
Well, actually, I was going to say almost the same thing, but you should remember several years ago in a hostage situation in an opera in Moscow, the security forces used certain chemicals to control the situation, but the intensity, the density of the chemicals in the air in this small opera where there were hundreds of people caused a sort of casualty. So it's not only the mere sort of killing capacity in a warfare, but also the amount of chemicals that people are subject to or exposed to might also have such damaging effects.
Sure, Julio, thanks for your patience.
Our community's been talking a lot about what they quote unquote call hypocrisy, and here's one tweet that I'd like to bring it up. Charity begins at home. I think Israel should lead the way in making an example by destroying theirs. And the question of geopolitics, Ms. Walker, talking about you have Syria that you're getting rid of chemical weapons, and then you have U.S., Russia, and then you have Israel that they still have a stockpile. That our community is saying that. What do you say to that?
There were 6 countries. That's a very good point to raise. There were 6 countries still outstanding from the Chemical Weapons Convention, and those are the ones we really want to still go after. Israel, Egypt, Angola, South Sudan,
I've actually
Myanmar,
got a graphic on my laptop, so as you're talking, Paul, we can
North
show
Korea.
it. Yeah.
And we've focused for several years on Syria, Israel, and Egypt, the 3 major players in the 3 of the major players in the Middle East. Now with Syria coming in, I think the good point needs to be made. Israel should ratify. Israel has signed the treaty. We really don't know publicly if they have a chemical weapons stockpile. We know they have the capability, but they really need to ratify at this point. And Egypt, too, has neither signed nor ratified, so they need to accede to the treaty. But I totally agree. No country should have chemical weapons today in any way, shape, or form. And the hard country, the difficult country that no one has been able to talk to is North Korea, of course. We do believe Angola, South Sudan, and Myanmar will all come in the very near future. So then you're really left with only 3 countries, Israel, Egypt, and North Korea.
So let's say you talk to all of those countries, they all sign on. There's still the issue of then you've got to get rid of the weapons, right? I'm going to show our audience just a little graphic here. It's a fly into a state in the United States. This is where the US has some stockpiles sitting there in Kentucky. Just getting a little bit closer here. Tell us about this facility. Oh yeah, okay, Pfizer's on it. Bluegrass Chemical Agent Destruction Pilot Plant. Just heading into there right now. What's going on there, and why is it taking the US so long to get rid of its chemical weapons?
Well, I think I want to actually go back to a point that Ralph Trapp brought up earlier on, which is that destroying chemical weapons is really hard, and the facilities which are put up to destroy these chemical weapons, if they're going to run safely and they're not going to cause damage to the environment and there's not going to be risks to the health of the people who are working there, then these are technically difficult things to put up. And a lot of what we've seen, both in the Russian Federation and in the United States, is that they have had a hard time getting facilities up and running that are capable of destroying chemical weapons and meeting environmental standards.
And there are a couple of ways of destroying the weapons, right? Aren't there? There are a couple of ways of doing it, at least 3 different ways. Do you want to very quickly tell us how difficult it is to do it?
Well, sure. There's 2 main things people do. They either burn them at very, very high temperatures, and you can imagine what the risks are when you're burning highly toxic chemicals at very high temperatures, or they basically mix them with another chemical which neutralizes the toxicity of the chemical weapon. And then you also always have these problems with, well, how do you then treat whatever waste comes out of these processes? So in the case of neutralization, you're left with something, it's called a reaction mass. What do you do with the reaction mass? You have to process it further. When you're talking about burning, you have to have special filters put up so that the gases that get released in the air aren't going to be hazardous to the health of the people living there. Right. So these are the kinds of things you have to grapple with when you're destroying chemical weapons.
The key point I would add, Iser, is that these weapons were never built to be dismantled and recycled.
Right.
They were built to be used. Okay. And those of us who've worked in this field for years have thought to ourselves, whoever dreamed up of producing like 40,000 metric tons, millions of these weapons in Russia or the United States? Really crazy, illogical sort of Cold War politics. So to destroy them, as Pfizer is saying, is very, very difficult when you're dealing not only with agent, you're dealing with propellant, rocket propellant, you're dealing with explosives, and it's extremely dangerous.
And
so everything has to
billions and billions and billions of dollars to do it.
And the costs have just skyrocketed from in the United States alone, from $2 billion as an early estimate in the 1980s to $40 billion today.
Sure. Julia.
We have another question coming in from our community, and this one's from Mustafa. I'll read it first. It will be in the best interest of all not to stock chemical weapons. If I may ask, why are we keeping these weapons? Mustafa?
Well, actually, for some countries, especially in the Middle East, chemical weapons are known as the poor man's atomic bomb. And some of the countries like Syria, Iraq in the past, and possibly Egypt, they all built chemical weapons arsenals as a deterrent against Israel's suspected nuclear weapons capability. You know, Israel follows a policy of ambiguity. They neither declare nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons, but almost everybody believes that they have nuclear weapons and a good number of nuclear weapons arsenal in their capacity. So in order to some sort of striking a balance against Israeli nuclear capabilities, these countries in the Middle East have developed chemical as well as biological weapons capabilities.
Okay.
But with respect to these difficulties associated with dismantling chemical weapons, I definitely agree this is not an easy thing, and also very, very expensive, and sometimes even more expensive than producing these weapons. But if there is the political will, there is nothing that cannot be achieved. So therefore, what is important here is that getting rid of the Syrian chemical weapons arsenal will, in my personal opinion, bring in Israel, and Israel may be closer to ratification of the Chemical Weapons Convention. That, of course, Egypt will be left alone in the region, and there will be a lot of mounting pressure on Egypt. And also, chemical weapons arsenal of the Assad regime was one of the major concerns of Israel and the United States, because especially countries like Turkey, they are not comfortable with Assad still staying in power, and they are asking from the U.S. and Israel to put more pressure against Iranian and Russian support. And one of the major concerns of Israel and the United States was, and still is for the time being, Assad's chemical weapons capability. So once Assad will be cleaned up from chemical weapons, Israeli and U.S. policies might change against Assad.
All right, Mustafa, I'm just going to squeeze in something because I really want our audience to see it. Paul, you said this was a wonderful opportunity with Syria, and I'm just going to play something to end our show with. It's the OPCW inspectors in Syria.
Congratulations
to the Nobel Peace Prize. Have a look at this.
The organisation has received this remarkable recognition for its work throughout the world and throughout its history. Yes, in its citation, the Nobel Committee said, and I quote, "Recent events in Syria, where chemical weapons have again been put to use, have underlined the need to enhance the efforts to do away with such weapons. But this prize goes to all of our colleagues, past and present, even though we happen to be in the limelight here today. So let me pass on Ahmad's congratulations to all of you. Well done, guys. But in the same breath, let me say that we must not rest on our laurels. We've only just embarked on our extraordinarily difficult mission. We've done it with determination, commitment, courage and professionalism. But there's a long road ahead and there are many more milestones to pass. So I'll allow you to savour the moment, literally for a moment. Well done all. Now get back to your tasks. There are tight deadlines to meet."
Excellent. All right.
Wow. That was optimistic. When you heard about that, Paul, I'm just going to ask you a one-word description because we're right at the end of the show. When you heard about the OPCW getting the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, your reaction?
Well deserved.
Faiza, your reaction?
Wow.
Wow, okay. Mustafa, your reaction when you heard about that?
Well, actually, I was particularly happy because Turkey General Ambassador Ahmet is from Turkey.
Okay.
And
Mustafa was excited. I'm going to preempt him because we have to wrap up this part of the show. You will hear how excited he was in the post-show at stream.aljazeera.com. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, why are Aboriginal Australians suffering from extremely poor health and low education rates? A new film says that they are living in conditions worse than during the years of apartheid in South Africa. We'll find out why tomorrow. Meanwhile, we'll be online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Hello again, we're back again. The Streams Online post show, because you know we haven't finished talking. This is a huge, huge subject. We are talking about the efforts to eradicate chemical weapons in Syria and elsewhere around the world. Let's get back to that conversation. So in that tiny little break, we had about 10 seconds, Julio. I said, what have we not talked about the community want to talk about?
We have one thing that we haven't talked about, and that is skepticism. So I want to share this tweet by Dev. He basically talking about Syria says, I would say they probably would keep some to a side or make more. And Faiza, I heard you nod, and I heard it, so I'm going to ask, what do you think of that statement?
I mean, I think it's a fair question, because one of the sort of weaknesses, if you will, of the Chemical Weapons Convention is that it relies primarily on what a country declares. So it starts from the premise that a country who's coming into the treaty wants to get rid of its chemical weapons, and so it's going to tell the organization everything that it needs to know about what needs to be destroyed. And so in a Syrian situation where the regime was basically forced into the treaty, it's fair to say, well, are these guys really going to tell us everything they have? Now, I think the way it gets resolved, though, is that the major powers, the United States, for example, has a lot of intelligence that it's gathered over the years about what the Syrian stockpile looks like, and they're clearly monitoring what Assad is doing with his weapons. And so what's happening here is that this intelligence information is being cross-checked against the public declaration, against the declaration that Syria has made to the OPCW, and that's really where you get your assurance that he's not going to be holding back on, at least not on major quantities, I think. Right. There may be a little bit here and there, but it's not going to be enough that it'll constitute the kind of threat that his current stockpile does.
So intelligent information, you said, are you talking about spying here?
Well, I thought we all talked about spying all the time.
It was like, we all been spied on all the time. We know what we're talking about here. Intelligence information. I should have done maybe air quotes when you were saying that. Okay, we get it. We spy to make sure that they're really telling the truth. We, the world, spies.
The issue, if I mean, Julio, of skepticism is well taken, I think, because I'll give you one example. In Libya, when Muammar Gaddafi was alive, in 2003 and 2004, he came and joined all the conventions, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Biological Weapons Convention, Chemical Weapons Convention, and declared a chemical weapons stockpile. That stockpile went forward to be destroyed. But when the new regime, after Gaddafi died and the new regime came in, they said, oops, we found a second stockpile. And so Gaddafi had actually hidden a weaponized stockpile of mustard agent that no one had known about. The hidden stockpile was probably 2 to 3 tons. It was actually quite small relative to American, but still very dangerous and could be very deadly. So you do have to be, as Faiza said, you do have to be concerned that everything is declared. I believe, though, the stakes are so high in this case. Basically, Bashar al-Assad wants to save his life and that of his family, that in fact it would be really stupid on his part to cheat and hide anything. So I have yet to be convinced that he's actually hiding anything. And the other point to make is that the OPCW inspectors continue to go back all the time and inspect. That's the name of the game. Everyone is inspected constantly all the time. So it's not only destroying a stockpile, but it's in fact preventing the reemergence of chemical weapons. So all your chemical industry is inspected, farmer production facilities are inspected. He won't be left alone for more than a month at any point in time.
So, Mustafa, let me...
I agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Paul and Faiza. In principle, it's always possible for countries to hide a certain amount of chemical weapons somewhere. It may not be possible for the OPCW experts to find them out. But, I mean, we must remember the fact that Russia was very active in cutting such a deal, and they have huge influence on Assad, and I don't believe Russians would allow the Assad regime to even hide even a single centimeter cube of any chemical, because this will have a detrimental impact on Russia in terms of its status in world politics. So although there is this possibility everywhere in the world that any regime, if they are committed to, they can hide a certain amount of chemical weapons, but Russia will weigh in very powerfully and will not let the Syrian regime to hide any amount of chemicals. So I sort of believe and am somewhat convinced that Russia will take care of Assad regime chemical weapons capabilities.
You know, we just ended the main show with talking about the Nobel Peace Prize and the OPCW. Must have I interrupted you slightly because your one-word reaction turned into a couple of sentences. But let me go back to that reaction, because I'm thinking that something's happened where you're now being recognised, your work is being recognised. So I just want to tap into that. So your reaction when the OPCW won that Peace Prize, what was it again?
Well, I said I'm particularly happy because Director General of OPCW is a Turkish diplomat. Ambassador Ahmet Üzümcü is from Turkey.
Oh, that's very nice. You were being very patriotic. OPCW, what's the fun acronym for that, Paul?
What does it stand for?
Yeah, not really, but there's a fun one. You told us a joke earlier.
Oh, OPC what?
OPC what?
OPC what? And I raise that because when I go to The Hague 3, 4, 5 times a year,
yeah,
where the OPCW is located, and I remember coming in through Dutch customs in Amsterdam at Schiphol Airport,
yeah,
and the customs officer, would look at your passport and say, "And what are you doing?" I said, "Going to The Hague," and he'd say, "Well, why are you going to The Hague?" And I said, "I'm going to the OPCW," and this is the border control customs officer would say, "OPC what?" And I several times
that happened to me as well.
It happened.
Everyone has the same story.
So now I think not that OPCW rolls off your tongue so quickly,
yeah,
but still, I think people are now aware that this is the largest multilateral arms control organization in the world. It's not largest in budget and personnel, but it's the largest in number of countries. 190 countries representing 98% of the world. And so with only 6 countries left outside, it's a very, very important arms control and global security regime.
Sure.
I wanted to jump in. The other thing about the OPCW that doesn't get remarked on is that the convention is much more complete than any other arms control regime, because it actually bans an entire class of weapons to everybody, and it sets up procedures by which the international community can make sure that this entire class of weapons is banned. Compare that to, say, the nuclear regime, where some states do get to keep nuclear weapons. So it really is. It was a huge development in arms control law when that convention went through, and it really stands out as that example.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, it's important, Faiza, I think, to point out that it's generally defined as a non-discriminatory regime. And that's one of the reasons, maybe the major reason, why it's worked out so well and is so widely accepted that, the Russians or Americans, the P5, the Chinese, the British, the French don't have some special exemption so they can have a handful of chemical weapons. No chemical weapons are allowed to anybody. Everybody's inspected in the same playing field. It's non-discriminatory across the board.
So with this recognition with the OPCW, and I have to say, Paul, I don't want to embarrass you, but we dragged you out of an event honouring you. Do you want to explain what that was about?
Well, I just jumped into the seat probably 2 minutes before
literally
the show began, as you know.
Yeah.
But I just had a luncheon held in my honour by the Swedish ambassador Björn Livald here in Washington D.C. on behalf of the Right Livelihood Award. And some of your viewers may not know that, but the Right Livelihood Award is an annual award given by the Swedish Parliament and the Right Livelihood Award organization. And it's generally known as the Alternative Nobel Prize.
Right. Is it because Sweden's next door to Norway and they wanted to have their prize?
Exactly. So Sweden and Norway go hand in hand in this a bit. But that actually was announced on September 26th for my efforts, and I include all of my colleagues and friends in this too, for having worked over 20 years in trying to basically eliminate globally this whole arsenal of chemical weapons. To date, we've helped destroy over 58,000 metric tons, probably close to 10 million weapons.
Will we do it in your lifetime? Will we, like every single one that's declared, be gone in your lifetime?
I believe they will.
How long are you going to live?
But the big question is whether Israel, Egypt, and North Korea will join the regime. Those three. And North Korea could be the toughest of all.
Wow.
But there's a large stockpile that's deployed in the field in North Korea. So that's really a large question. But I expect, if in fact we get Angola, Myanmar, and South Sudan in, which we will, I know we will in probably the next year or two, and I think Egypt and Israel, as Mustafa I think pointed out, will likely come in as well.
Yeah.
Then you're left only with North Korea, and I can't imagine that will drag on all that long.
Wow.
But it really means peace on the Korean Peninsula too.
Wow. Julio.
Last tweet. Destroying chemical weapons will save thousands of lives, but without a diplomatic resolution, more will die from conventional weapons.
Wow. Well, that's a conversation. That's a huge conversation for another time. But that's really interesting. I want to say thank you to Mustafa. Thank you very much to Faiza and to Paul as well. It's really great being able to get a sense of chemical weapons from people who work in this field every single day. A final thought, Paul, that might actually help us understand what's going on in Syria and beyond?
I think we should watch closely all the news around Syria and chemical weapons. I think we should put increasing pressure on Israel and Egypt to join the treaty, but perhaps most important of all, we should support any diplomatic resolution to end the widespread, indiscriminate conventional weapons killing that continues to murder thousands and thousands every week.
Professor, I'm going to call you Professor, I'll give you your right title. Are you going to school us with one last thought, just briefly, to end this conversation on, Mustafa?
Well, the ultimate goal must be to get rid of all sorts of weapons of destruction, not only in the Middle East, but in the entire world.
And OPC what no longer? Faiza, that's your old organization. A final thought for us. Thank you so much for making us understand chemical weapons so much better. One last thought.
All weapons are bad, and we need to do more to regulate them.
I love this group of guests, Julio. If I had a dinner party, you would all be at it.
I would make dinner for all of them.
Yeah, it would be great. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed your time. A sign of a good conversation is I never want to end it. Can you hear me stalling? How is the community?
The community keeps tweeting in. They're great. #AJStream. Keep tweeting us.
Julio Ricardo Varela, will you come back again?
I think I will, Femi.
All right, I'm going to write down Thursday for you so you can lie down for a few days. All right, thank you so much. Let me talk about where we're going to be on Tuesday. Why are Aboriginal Australians suffering from extremely poor health and low education rates? Well, a new film says that they are living in conditions worse than during the years of apartheid in South Africa. And we'll find out more tomorrow. In the meantime, we'll be online. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.